Alright everybody, so if you decided just to stay and see a little bit more of the 6th scale character and hear a little bit about me ramble about who the Guardian of the Whills were, and a little background history of why I think not just this character but the Star Wars canon mentioning just the mention of the Whills in the movie, because now, as I mentioned, don't make the mistake about the Guardians of the Whills between the Guardians of the Whills and the Jedi Temple Sentries. Okay. Now, as we've seen in Star Wars: The Clone Wars, which some of them became Inquisitors. All right. So if you do follow the Star Wars Clone Wars, and a lot of people don't know this, but the Star Wars Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebel that they have now is actually part of canon. Since Disney took over George Lucas Star Wars, now that a lot of what you see and what you're going, the future novels are now considered canon, to include the comic books that you will read for Darth Vader down, and Star Wars, New Star Wars. So a lot of that, they all intertwine together, and a lot of people don't know that. So what you see now and what you're going to read, especially Rebels and the Clone Wars, they all tie in, and they fit. What I love about it is that they fill in all these gaps and a lot of questions that you had, or unanswered questions about certain things you see in the movies. And they do a really good job of going a little bit further and explaining a little bit about the characters and what happens in between. Anyways, okay. As I mentioned, the Guardians of the Temple of Whills were just solely dedicated to guarding the Kyber crystals at the temple, and possibly holocrons and maybe Jedi journals, whereas the Jedi Temple Sentries were just dedicated to the Jedi temples. Okay. Now, so what is the Temple of the Whills, and who are the Whills? Okay, first of all, we have to understand a bit about the history of the character in the Star Wars universe. As we seen in Star Wars Rogue One, Donnie Yen's character, Chirrut Imwe, are the Guardians of the Temple of Whills. Now, there are 4 sensitive characters. Now, let's take it back a notch, okay? Whills were in George Lucas's original script. Now, I wouldn't say it was really a script, maybe like a treatment or something. It's his first writings. And it was called The Adventures of Luke Starkiller, as told by the Journals of the Whills. All right. Now, the Whills were an all-powerful alien race. They were highly intelligent, they were immortal, they chronicle things throughout the galaxy, right? And they were basically the Force. They were neither light or dark, they weren't Jedi or Sith, but they created a balance, all right? And this was his original concept. And his stories were to be narrated by the Whills, okay? However, George Lucas later decided he wanted to polish it up a bit and tone it down, because he thought that this theory would be better understood if he called it the Force. So that's how we got the Force. All right. Now we see a side story that also pays homage to the Whills, and it was in a comic book, and it's also mentioned in Star Wars Rebels. All right. Now, Qui Gon Jinn, now he traveled, okay, to another world. Now, in the last 3 episodes of the Clone Wars, we know that Qui Gon Jinn learned the secrets of eternal consciousness. And if you haven't watched that, I recommend you watching Star Wars Clone Wars, because, as I mentioned, it fills in a lot of gaps. Okay, he learned the secrets of eternal consciousness, and he passes that down to Yoda. All right. Now when Yoda learns the secret, when he travels to an ancient location as well and meets with 5 Force priestesses, they were the ones that also trained Qui-Gon Jinn. And if you guys haven't seen it, as I mentioned, I recommend you seeing it. But if you've seen it, you know who they are. they mentioned each other as sisters, but they were priestesses, and they floated, and they wore white robes, and they had like a blank mask expression on them. All right. Now, how and who did Qui Gon Jinn learn to how did he learn to transcend himself after the physical world, right? To a Force ghost. Now, before Qui Gon Jinn's death, when he was killed by Darth Maul in Naboo, he traveled to a ancient place to see what they call the Shaman of the Whills. One of the shamans was known to have discovered the secret to eternal consciousness, and Jinn ended up learning the secrets, which allowed him to interact with the living after he died, becoming, as we mentioned to Yoda, part of the living, as he mentioned to Yoda, as part of the living force. All right. Now, here's something interesting. In a deleted scene in Episode 3, Jinn. This is on. It was never actually ended up making it into the original film, which is kind of good, because it would. I think it would have kind of confused people when it came down to this. But in a deleted scene in Episode 3, Qui Gon Jinn ended up manifesting himself and spoke with Yoda. All right. Now, in the deleted scene, Jinn stated that the path to eternal consciousness, it was accomplished by the Shaman of the Whills. A cut line had Yoda saying that the path to eternal consciousness is a secret from the ancient order of the Whills. However, the story was that Jinn was trained by the Shaman of the Whills, but later changed to the priestess. So I believe that the shaman of the Whills, as we saw in the comic book, is this one and the same as the priestess, the 5 priestesses or sisters you see in the last 3 episodes of the Clone Wars. Now, Qui Gon Jinn, he never finished his training, which probably resulted in him only being able to show up as a Force premonition, or a voice, or rather than in a whole manifestation of his own body, like ObiWan and Yoda can do, which is good. That's why I say that is good, because they didn't show that as that deleted scene in the movie, because that would have kind of offset that portion of it. Maybe this is why also that we, as I mentioned, we see Yoda, Obi-Wan, and Anakin as a Force ghost at the ending of Return of the Jedi, rather than Qui-Gon Jinn, because if you notice, you see Obi-Wan, you see Yoda, and then you see Anakin. Now, one thing I didn't like is how they inserted the young Anakin Skywalker, and when they redigitalized the film, and in place of the older Anakin Skywalker that we saw in the original film. I mean, I didn't really like that, to be honest with you, because you have the old Obi-Wan Kenobi, and you have the old Yoda, Master Yoda, but then you put a young Anakin Skywalker in there. That kind of just offset the film for me personally. If that was the case, then why not input the young Obi-Wan as well as the younger Yoda, right? So I didn't like how they ended up doing that. George Lucas did that in remastering it. Now, I believe that since Anakin was set out, to learn how to prevent Padme from dying, or rather bringing her back from death, he later learned through his journeys as Darth Vader the secrets of the Whills to eternal consciousness. And because we know that the path to eternal consciousness can only be achieved by oneself, right? But he never really achieved it until his death, because to be a part of eternal consciousness, it is through it states that it's through love and kindness. Well, we knew Darth Vader wasn't that way, right? But we never really achieved it. But he never really achieved it until his death, since the path is only through compassion and not greed, as stated, the release of self, not through exaltation of self, and love is the answer to the darkness. Now, in the novels, The Rise and Fall of Darth Vader, a really, really great novel, by the way, and he is able to become a Force ghost through the help of Obi-Wan Kenobi. So it kind of takes off from Return of the Jedi, where Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker, is with Luke Skywalker, and he dies after Luke Skywalker takes off his mask. And then it tells a little bit more about how his consciousness it speaks through ObiWan Kenobi and how he obtains the eternal consciousness is why you see Anakin Skywalker as a Force ghost. All right. Now, in the last 3 episodes of the Clone Wars, Yoda makes contact with the 5 priestesses and Qui Gon Jinn, and also he ends up making contact with Darth Bane. In the ending of the Clone Wars, the priestess or the spirits that we see at the end of the Clone Wars, they're never referred to as the Whills. Okay, they're just referred to as the priestesses, or they refer to each other as sisters. Okay, but we know now on StarWars.com they introduced them as the Whills. It's stated on StarWars.com that they are the Whills. All right. Now that it makes that canon. Okay. Now, a theory is that shamans were changed to the priestesses to give it a different manifestation into the Star Wars canon, right? Even though the original treatment had addressed the characters as the shaman of the Whills. All right, so you guys following me now? Now, this is where we get a little bit confusing. In one of the comics, Qui Gon Jinn refers to one of the shamans of the Whills as to ever be the first to ever attain the immortality through the power of the Force. Okay, we know that Jinn was the first of the Jedi to learn the power of transcending himself, his consciousness, into the next realm, which he became the Force Ghost. He also was the first to pass on his knowledge to Master Yoda, and then Master Yoda to Obi-Wan Kenobi, and as we've seen at the end of Revenge of the Sith, and having this knowledge which allowed him to vanish at the moment of the death, at his death. Well, and let me talk a little bit about that. As we see in Obi-Wan in Episode 4, when he was struck down by Darth Vader, you notice he disappeared. Okay, and then Yoda did the same thing in his hut when he was talking to Luke Skywalker when he was in the Dagobah system, right? So their bodies just vanish, as opposed to when you see other Jedis being killed. Their bodies remain there, but being that they knew the secrets of eternal consciousness, their body ended up just disappearing. That's why you hear Obi-Wan tell Darth Vader, if you strike me down, I will become more powerful than you can ever imagine. Okay. Now, new writers, they often go back to Lucas's stories as well as pull from legends, which I think is wonderful. Because they didn't totally do away with Star Wars legend, right? For example, the story of Admiral Thrawn, he was first introduced into the Star Wars legends. Okay, they talked about him in Star Wars legends. Then they pulled him into canon in Star Wars Rebels, and also a novel which is written by Timothy Zahn, however you want to say that. But and it's very interesting. It tells a little bit. That story tells a little bit about how Admiral Thrawn actually rised into his ranks, and which was something that was really unheard of in the Star Wars universe, because there was a bit of prejudice against non-humanoid beings. Well, not necessarily humans, but humans rising in the ranks of the Empire. Okay, excuse me. Now, and I have a tendency to veer off. I know. I'm going to try to get back on track here, but if you're still following me, I appreciate that. Now, we see in Star Wars Rogue One, we see the destruction of Jeddah by the Death Star, right? But if you think now, don't think that's the last you're ever going to see of Jeddah, because it was mentioned by Garrett Edwards that he didn't think that this would be the last time we see Jeddah in Star Wars, which I think is another thing that's exciting, because in my view, that is the center point of much of the Jedi knowledge, the Force mytho, the spiritual concepts of Star Wars universe. So, and that, how they're going to bring that in and get everybody, to use that as a center focal point, I think, because you can find so many spiritual things about the Force world on that. So, and So we know that the Whills are the most powerful characters in the Star Wars universe, right? It's that right there alone, I believe, is fact when it comes to Star Wars. They are the most powerful characters in Star Wars universe. Now, there's even a theory that Snoke may be a Whills of the shamans, but personally, I think that's a little far-fetched, and that's a discussion for another time. But so basically that's who the Whills were. The Whills were, as I mentioned, the Force. They were the Force. They were the chronicles. They chronicalized everything when it came to the Star Wars universe. They were an original concept by... Sorry about that. My camera has a tendency to shut off if I go past a certain point, that tells me that I need to cut off this video and go ahead and start getting edited and uploading. Okay, but anyways, I thank you guys for watching this far. If you made it this far with my rambling about this character in Star Wars, I'm a big Star Wars fan, I admit it, and I think it's so exciting where the Star Wars universe is going, because they're adding so much more, and now that we're starting to see certain things as canon, and Disney and the Disney writers and directors, they're pulling a lot of things from Legends as well. So Legends, you know, a lot of people were just all up in a roar about how the past books were no longer considered legend. However, you know, Disney ended up now just changing everything, that everything we see now is going to be considered legend, but they didn't totally do away with it, and a lot of the writers are bringing in some of the storylines, but not completely, because we know that episode 7, 8, and 9 are not the same as what we read in Star Wars Legend, whereas Leia and Han Solo ended up having 2 children, were also part of the ways of the Force, and so on and so on. And so I think it's good how they're doing it, and I think it's good how they're bringing in some of the storyline, because can you imagine, a lot of that stuff has already been set. All the stories have been set, and of course with Disney changing a few things, you know, it's okay. They're going a different path, but I like that they're bringing other things in instead of trying to revamp the entire universe. You know, they're keeping a portion here, they're keeping a portion here, which is good. All right, here I go again. I know I'm rambling, guys, but nevertheless, thank you for watching first the unboxing of this. Also, thank you for listening this far. I cut off my face, as you see here, because I don't think you guys want to see how beautiful and handsome I am right over here. No, you just want to see Donnie Yen right there, or Chirrut Imwe. And I thank you guys for watching. I appreciate that. Don't forget, please, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't like the video, give it a thumbs down. If you want to hear a little bit more about, I don't know, other Star Wars characters, if you want me to start doing more information about Star Wars characters, let me know. I mean, make your comments down there, and I appreciate you guys watching. And you guys take care of yourself, and may the Force be with you.